The fastest way to lose power is to defend yourself. And if that sounds wrong, that's because you've been trained to believe defense equals strength, when in reality defense is an admission, an unspoken agreement that someone else has the authority to question, judge, or define you. The moment you explain yourself, justify your actions, or rush to clear your name, you step into a frame where you are no longer the author of your identity. You are the accused, and the person across from you becomes the judge, even if they never earned that position. This is why the most confident-sounding defenses still weaken you, because defense is not about truth. It is about hierarchy, and hierarchy always favors the one who does not need to speak. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. He saw that power does not belong to the most reasonable person in the room. It belongs to the one who controls the frame, and defending yourself is the fastest way to surrender that control. Think about how these moments actually happen. Someone questions your decision, doubts your competence, implies a flaw, and your instinct is immediate. You want to correct the record, explain your intent, prove you are misunderstood. But that instinct is not logic. It is fear, fear of losing status, fear of being misread, fear of exclusion, and the people who understand power know how to trigger that fear effortlessly. Defense feels productive because it feels active, but activity is not authority. And the truth most people never realize is that the more you defend, the more you signal that their judgment matters. This is why some people can be criticized relentlessly and still rise, while others collapse under a single accusation. The difference is not character, it is position. Defense places you beneath scrutiny, non-defense places scrutiny beneath you. The world tells you to speak up for yourself, to clarify, to correct misunderstandings. But Machiavelli would tell you that clarity is often the enemy of control, because the moment you explain, you expose your internal logic to attack. And once your logic is visible, it can be dismantled piece by piece. This is why defending yourself rarely ends the problem. It invites more questions, more doubts, more tests, because you have signaled availability for judgment. Power works in the opposite direction. It withholds access. It does not rush to be understood, and it certainly does not beg to be believed. The people who seem untouchable are not better at arguing. They are better at refusing the premise that an argument is required at all. If this idea feels uncomfortable, it's because it strips away a habit you've relied on for safety. But discomfort is often the first sign that you're looking at the mechanism rather than the story you tell yourself. Most people will instinctively reject this because defense feels moral. It feels fair. It feels human. But power has never been fair. It has always been structural. And those who rise are the ones who understand that perception moves faster than truth. If this way of thinking resonates, it usually means you're done playing the game of constant explanation. And people who reach that point tend to stay close to environments that sharpen this awareness instead of dulling it. Because growth accelerates when you're surrounded by ideas that remove weakness rather than comfort it. The crucial thing to understand is that refusing to defend yourself is not passivity. It is a strategic withdrawal from a losing battlefield, because every defense assumes guilt, and guilt is the lever others use to move you. Once you stop defending, something strange begins to happen. The attacks don't stop immediately, but they lose precision. They feel awkward, incomplete, as if something essential is missing, because the person attacking you no longer has access to the role they need you to play. This is where most people panic and revert, but Machiavellian strategy requires patience, because the first phase of power is confusion, not dominance. In the next part, we will dissect why people instinctively try to put you on defense in the first place, what they gain from it psychologically and socially, and how recognizing that motive allows you to step out of the trap before it closes, without confrontation, without explanation. and without giving them the power they're trying to take. Once you understand that defending yourself is a positional mistake rather than a moral duty, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why do people try so hard to put you on defense in the first place? Because no behavior spreads this consistently unless it produces power for someone. Machiavelli understood that the easiest way to dominate another person is not to overpower them, but to force them into explanation, because explanation is labor, and whoever is working is already beneath the one who is judging the work. When someone questions your motives, doubts your decision, or subtly challenges your credibility, what they are really doing is attempting to elevate themselves into the role of evaluator. And the moment you respond defensively, you accept that role without realizing it. This is why accusations are often vague rather than precise, why criticism is framed as concern or curiosity instead of facts, because vagueness forces you to fill in the gaps, and the more you explain, the deeper you sink into their frame. There are patterns to this behavior, and seeing them clearly removes their emotional sting. Some people push you onto defense because they feel threatened by your independence, your clarity, or your upward movement, and defense is their way of slowing you down without competing directly. Others do it because they crave authority, and putting you on trial, even casually, allows them to feel important without earning respect. And then there are those who do it opportunistically. They sense uncertainty and exploit it, because nothing signals vulnerability faster than the need to be understood. All of them benefit from the same outcome. Your energy shifts away from forward motion and towards self-justification. Machiavelli would call this a strategic drain, because while you are busy explaining who you are, they are positioning themselves as the one who gets to decide whether your explanation is sufficient. This is also why defending yourself rarely satisfies the attacker, no matter how reasonable or truthful your defense is, because satisfaction was never the goal, control was. The more coherent your explanation, the more material you provide to be questioned, reframed, or weaponized later. And this is how people slowly lose authority without ever losing an argument. What makes this trap so effective is that it disguises itself as fairness, the illusion that if you just clarify enough, the misunderstanding will disappear. But power dynamics do not dissolve through clarity, they solidify through repetition. Every time you defend yourself, you rehearse the same hierarchy, you as the one who must justify, them as the one who gets to evaluate. Over time, this becomes expectation, and expectation becomes reputation. This is why Machiavelli warned that allowing others to judge you publicly, even once, invites them to do it again, because you have taught them that the role is available. The most dangerous aspect of this dynamic is that it feels reasonable in the moment. You tell yourself you are being mature, transparent, cooperative, but what you are really doing is trading long-term position for short-term relief. Relief feels good, but it is expensive because it trains people to come back with more questions, more doubts, more challenges, each one slightly bolder than the last. When you stop defending yourself, this pattern breaks, but before it breaks externally, it must break internally, because the urge to defend is driven by fear, fear of being misread, fear of losing approval, fear of exclusion. And as long as those fears remain unexamined, silence will feel like loss instead of control. This is why the transition feels uncomfortable, even wrong, because you are resisting a reflex that once kept you safe. But Machiavelli would remind you that strategies are not judged by how they feel, they are judged by what they produce, and defense produces dependence. In the next part, we move from motive to mechanics, from understanding why people push you onto defense to learning exactly how to step out of that position in real time, not through silence alone, but through precise behavioral shifts that collapse the frame without escalating conflict or inviting further scrutiny. Execution begins the moment someone tries to pull you into explanation, because the trap only works if you step into it willingly, and stepping out requires discipline rather than courage. The first thing Machiavelli would insist on is control of tempo, because defense thrives on speed. It relies on catching you off balance and forcing a response before you have time to see what is happening. So the instant you feel the urge to justify yourself, that internal pressure to correct the record, you slow everything down mentally, not outwardly, not theatrically, but internally, because speed belongs to the accuser and time belongs to the one who holds power. When you slow the moment down, you interrupt the script they are running, and interruption creates uncertainty, which is poison to authority. The second shift is refusing to answer the question being implied rather than asked, because most attempts to put you on defense are not direct accusations. They are suggestions, raised eyebrows, just wondering comments, or vague doubts designed to make you volunteer information. Answering these is a mistake, because you are responding to a premise that was never established, and once you answer, you legitimize it. The Machiavellian move is to respond only to what is concrete and ignore what is implied, because implication feeds on imagination, and imagination fills gaps with guilt. This does not mean becoming silent or evasive. It means being selective, brief, and closed, giving no more information than is necessary and never explaining motive unless it is demanded by someone who has earned that right. Tone matters more than content here, because tone communicates status faster than language. A calm, even tone signals that nothing important is being negotiated, while urgency signals that something valuable is at stake. When silence is appropriate, it must be relaxed rather than tense, because tense silence invites pursuit, while relaxed silence ends the exchange. There will be moments when a response is unavoidable, and this is where minimalism becomes a weapon not to convince but to conclude. A short, neutral statement that neither defends nor attacks, delivered without emotional charge, closes the door without creating a scene. And once delivered, you do not linger. You return to what you were doing as if the matter is finished, because for you, it is. What most people fail to understand is that power is not asserted by winning arguments. It is asserted by deciding which arguments are worth having. And the moment you stop defending yourself, you force others to reveal whether they have substance or only pressure. Over time, this pattern produces a visible shift. People begin to test you less, not because they fear you, but because their usual tactics no longer produce engagement, and engagement is what they seek. This is where patience becomes critical, because the first phase of refusing to defend yourself often produces confusion rather than respect. People push harder, repeat themselves, or escalate slightly, hoping to provoke the response they are used to. And if you hold steady through this phase, the dynamic flips. Confusion turns into restraint, restraint into expectation, and expectation into reputation. This is the point where refusing to defend yourself stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like a natural position, because internally you are no longer negotiating your worth in real time. In the next part, we move beyond individual interactions and into long-term positioning, how consistently refusing to defend yourself reshapes how others see you, alters social hierarchies quietly, and makes challenges less frequent before they ever reach you. Once refusing to defend yourself becomes consistent, the effect extends far beyond individual moments and settles into reputation. Because power is never decided by what happens once. It is decided by what people expect will happen if they try again. Machiavelli understood that lasting authority is created when others begin to regulate their behavior around you without being told. And this happens quietly, through repeated interactions where familiar tactics fail. Every social environment runs on an invisible calculation of cost and reward, attention, credibility, risk. And when someone attempts to challenge, question, or corner you into explanation and receives nothing in return, no justification, no emotional reaction, no effort, they have paid a cost for zero gain. Human behavior adapts quickly to this imbalance. People stop using tools that don't work, and over time this creates a deterrent field around you, not through fear, but through inefficiency. This is why people who never defend themselves are often described as hard to read or difficult to pin down, because they have removed themselves from the usual exchange of pressure and response that defines hierarchy. Predictability plays a critical role here, not predictability of opinions, but predictability of posture. When your response to scrutiny is always calm, brief, and closed, you signal stability, and stability is trusted far more than loud confidence. In contrast, those who rely on forcing explanations reveal volatility, escalation, and emotional need, traits that slowly undermine their own authority. As this contrast becomes visible, something subtle shifts in group dynamics. When tension arises, attention no longer centers on you as the one who must answer. It shifts toward the person creating the tension, because the absence of defense reframes them as the one disrupting order. Many people sabotage this stage by trying to accelerate it, becoming colder, sharper, or deliberately intimidating. But Machiavelli would caution against unnecessary force, because force invites resistance, and resistance keeps you trapped in conflict. The objective is not to dominate visibly, but to become costly to challenge incorrectly, and that cost is communicated through restraint rather than aggression. Over time, your refusal to defend becomes a boundary others feel without being able to articulate, and boundaries that are felt are stronger than those that are declared. This process often results in a smaller social circle, because those who rely on pressure, manipulation, or constant evaluation lose interest when access disappears. But this is not loss, it is consolidation. Power always narrows before it deepens, and alignment replaces noise when weak tactics are filtered out. By this stage, challenges become rare, not because the world has grown kinder, but because the internal calculation has shifted, the reward is gone. In the final part, we close the loop completely by addressing the last place defense still tries to survive even when reputation is secure. The internal urge to justify, the reflex that appears in solitude rather than conversation, and how eliminating that reflex completes the transition from reaction to control. By the time refusing to defend yourself has reshaped your reputation, the only place the habit still survives is inside your own mind, in the quiet reflex to justify yourself even when no one is asking, the internal rehearsal of explanations that will never be spoken. And this is the final layer Machiavellian control must dissolve, because power that depends on constant self-justification is still conditional. The deepest form of dominance is internal sovereignty. The moment you stop evaluating yourself through imagined tribunals and stop preparing defenses for crimes that were never committed. Most people never reach this stage because the urge to explain feels virtuous. It feels honest. It feels safe. But Machiavelli would say safety purchased through submission is never stable. It only delays loss. The internal shift happens when you replace the need to be understood with the commitment to be coherent over time, because coherence makes explanation unnecessary. Patterns speak louder than words ever could. Once your identity is anchored in trajectory rather than moments, single accusations lose gravity, misinterpretations lose urgency, and silence no longer feels like risk, it feels like alignment. This is why truly powerful people are selective about feedback. They don't reject information emotionally. They filter it structurally. Insight from those with competence and alignment is absorbed calmly, while noise from those seeking leverage is ignored without argument, because argument implies relevance. As this filter stabilizes, the internal judge loses authority, because it no longer represents survival, it represents distraction, and distraction fades when it is recognized. This is the point where refusing to defend yourself stops being a tactic and becomes a posture, not something you do, but something you are, and when posture is genuine, it communicates authority without effort. You'll notice that the world does not suddenly agree with you, but it stops trying to pull explanations out of you, because the exchange no longer works and people adapt to what works. If you've followed this progression from understanding why defense weakens you, to seeing who benefits from putting you on trial, to stepping out of the frame in real time, to reshaping reputation, and finally to dissolving the internal reflex to justify, then what has changed is not your personality, but how power moves through your life. People who reach this point tend to stay close to ideas that maintain that clarity, not out of loyalty, but out of self-respect. Because drifting back into constant explanation feels like regression. And if growing knowledge inside a serious community matters to you, staying connected is simply the natural next step, not a favor, but a decision to keep your thinking sharp.